The frost on the inside of the 1998 Ford Taurus windshield was always the hardest part of the morning. Hannah Harding sat in the driver's seat, her fingernails chipped and blue from the cold, scraping a plastic spatula against the glass. In the back seat, huddled beneath 3 worn sleeping bags, her 7-year-old son, Leo, let out a familiar, rattling cough. Every sound he made was a physical weight on Hannah's chest. They had been living in the parking lot of a Portland superstore for 4 months, ever since Leo's asthma hospitalizations had drained her savings and cost them their cramped apartment. Hannah had hit rock bottom. She had exactly $14 to her name, half a loaf of bread, and a tank of gas that hovered dangerously near empty. She rested her forehead against the freezing steering wheel, closing her eyes, silently begging the universe for a break. Then came a sharp tap on the window. Hannah jolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expected to see a security guard or a police officer telling her to move along. Instead, she saw an older man in a sharply tailored charcoal overcoat, holding a leather briefcase. He looked entirely out of place amidst the shopping carts and freezing rain. Cautiously, Hannah rolled down the window just an inch. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice defensive. "Just let me get the engine warmed up, Hannah Harding," the man asked. His voice was calm, carrying a distinct East Coast cadence. Daughter of Thomas Harding? Granddaughter of Kevin Harding? Hannah blinked, taken aback. She hadn't heard her grandfather's name in decades. Kevin was a family ghost, a man who had vanished from her father's life before her father was even a teenager. "Who are you?" The man reached into his coat and slipped a card through the crack in the window. "My name is Gregory Finch. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Aiden Pendleton, your grandfather's former legal partner. I've been looking for you for nearly 6 months, Miss Harding. It took a private investigator to track your license plate here." Hannah stared at the card. "Look, Mr. Finch, I don't have any money. If my grandfather owed someone a debt, he's dead. My father is dead, and I have nothing." "You misunderstand me, Miss Harding," Finch said, a gentle empathy softening his professional demeanor. "You don't owe anything. You've inherited something. Your grandfather, Kevin, owned a property in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, a cabin, specifically, along with a substantial tract of surrounding land. Upon the recent death of the trust executor, the deed has legally defaulted to Kevin's last living direct descendant. That is you." Hannah let out a bitter, exhausted laugh. "A cabin. Right. Does it have heat?" "It has." "History," Finch replied carefully. "It has been entirely sealed since November of 1948. Kevin ordered it chained shut, placed it in a blind trust, and forbade anyone from entering it until the trust expired. That expiration date was triggered 3 weeks ago." 3 days later, Hannah and Leo were driving east, their gas tank filled and a cheap motel room paid for by a modest cash advance Finch had provided from the estate's liquid accounts. The drive was a blur of towering pines, winding mountain roads, and a rising sense of disbelief. Hannah kept looking in the rearview mirror at Leo, who was happily coloring in a new book, blissfully unaware of the bizarre twist their lives had just taken. They arrived in the small, insular town of Oak Haven, Montana, just as the sun began to dip behind the jagged peaks. Oak Haven was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, heavily reliant on the booming ski resort that sat just on the edge of the town limits. Hannah parked at the local diner to ask for directions to Blackwood Ridge, the address listed on Finch's paperwork. When she mentioned the name Kevin Harding to the waitress, a woman named Betty, whose name tag was pinned to a faded pink uniform, the diner went dead silent. A couple of local men at the counter stopped eating. "You're a Harding?" Betty asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I am," Hannah said, pulling Leo a little closer to her side. "Is there a problem?" An older man in a heavy flannel shirt turned on his stool. Kevin Harding was a thief and a coward. He burned down the old lumber mill in '48, stole the payroll, and ran. Left the town to starve during the worst winter in a century. Only reason the Caldwell family saved this town was by buying up the ashes and building the resort. Hannah swallowed hard. "I don't know anything about that. I just inherited his property." "That property is cursed," the old man spat. and Sheriff Caldwell ain't gonna like a Harding sniffing around the ridge. Hannah left the diner without ordering. A deep unease settled in her stomach, but desperation pushed her forward. She couldn't afford to be scared away by 50-year-old town gossip. She had a son to house. The road up Blackwood Ridge was little more than a neglected logging trail, choked with overgrown brush and heavy snowdrifts. Hannah had to park the Taurus a mile from the coordinates Finch had given her. Carrying Leo on her back, she trudged through the biting cold, the silence of the mountain pressing in on them. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked exactly like a tomb. It was a sturdy, log and stone structure built into the side of the mountain, but it was suffocated by decades of neglect. Heavy iron chains, thick with rust, were wrapped around the solid oak front door, secured by a massive, antiquated padlock. The windows were boarded shut from the inside. Hannah set Leo down on a relatively dry patch of porch. She retrieved the heavy bolt cutters Finch had purchased for her from the hardware store in town. It took her 10 minutes of exhausting, muscle-tearing effort, but finally, with a loud crack that echoed through the silent woods, the padlock gave way. The chains slithered to the wooden floorboards like dead snakes. She pushed the door open. A rush of stale, freezing air washed over her, smelling intensely of pine resin, dried leather, and dust. Hannah clicked on her heavy-duty flashlight, sweeping the beam across the interior. It was a perfect, eerie time capsule. A heavy wool coat still hung on a hook by the door. A pair of leather boots sat neatly beside an armchair. The furniture was covered in heavy canvas tarps, gray with 78 years of dust. On the rough-hewn wooden table in the center of the room sat a tin coffee cup and a newspaper dated November 12, 1948. "It's spooky, Mom," Leo whispered, clinging to her coat. "It's just old, baby," Hannah said, though her heart was pounding. Just old. As she moved deeper into the cabin, Hannah realized Kevin hadn't just left in a hurry. He had systematically secured the place. There were no personal photographs, no normal household clutter. Instead, taking up a massive portion of the back wall was a large, heavy iron safe. It was welded into the structural supports of the cabin itself. Hannah spent the next 2 hours cleaning the wood stove, finally managing to get a fire going with some dry wood stacked inside. As the cabin slowly warmed, she examined the safe. There was no dial, no keyhole, just a flat iron plate. It was baffling. It wasn't until she was sweeping the floor near the stone fireplace that she noticed it. One of the hearthstones was slightly raised, its mortar completely gone. Prying it up with a screwdriver, Hannah found a hollow cavity. Inside was a heavy, oilcloth-wrapped bundle. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it on the main table. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, a brass key, and a stack of black and white photographs. She opened the ledger. The handwriting was sharp and meticulous. November 14, 1948. If someone is reading this, I am either dead or I never found the courage to return. My name is Kevin Harding. They are going to blame me for the mill fire. Harrison Caldwell said it himself. The mill was failing, and he needed the insurance money. But worse, he needed a distraction to steal the town's war bonds relief fund. Hannah's breath hitched. She kept reading. Kevin detailed how he had caught Caldwell in the act. Caldwell had threatened Kevin's wife and young son Hannah's grandmother and father. To protect them, Kevin had fled, drawing Caldwell's men away from his family, but not before he stole back the stolen bonds and the original untampered land deeds of the entire valley. I have hidden the proof and the town's true wealth, where Caldwell can never touch it. The deeds prove that the land Caldwell claims as his own, the land where he intends to build his empire, belongs legally to the townspeople he robbed. Hannah looked at the brass key. She walked over to the blank iron safe. Running her hands along the side, she found a false wood panel on the adjacent wall. Prying it off revealed a hidden keyhole connected to the safe's internal mechanism. She inserted the brass key and turned it. Heavy tumblers clicked. The massive iron door swung open with a grinding groan. Hannah gasped. Inside the safe were stacks of pristine, uncashed bearer bonds from the 1940s worth an astronomical sum today due to accumulated interest. But more importantly, there were the original official land deeds, signed and sealed by the state governor in 1946. A sudden loud banging on the cabin door shattered the silence. Hannah shoved the ledger and the deeds into her backpack, heart in her throat. She stepped in front of Leo just as the cabin door was kicked open. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light, was a tall man in a sheriff's uniform. His badge glinted, his nameplate read, C. Caldwell. It was Sheriff Clayton Caldwell, the grandson of the man who had ruined her grandfather's life. Behind him stood two deputies. "I heard a rat broke into the old condemned cabin," Caldwell sneered, stepping inside. He looked at Hannah with pure disgust. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face in Oakhaven, Harding. You're trespassing on Caldwell Resort property. This is my grandfather's cabin," Hannah said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the terror icing her veins. "My lawyer verified the deed. I have every right to be here." "Not anymore," Caldwell said, gesturing to his deputies. "This structure is unsafe. I'm condemning it right now. You and the kid have 5 minutes to get out before I arrest you for squatting." His eyes darted to the open iron safe, and a flash of recognition and panic crossed his face. The Caldwells had clearly known something was hidden up here. "I'm not leaving," Hannah said. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the 1948 ledger, holding it up. "And I don't think you want me to, Sheriff. Not when I have your grandfather's meticulous accounting of how he burned down the mill and stole the town's relief funds." Caldwell stopped dead, the color drained from his face. "Give me that book," he demanded, taking a threatening step forward. "If you touch me, my lawyer in Portland will release the digital copies I've already sent him," Hannah bluffed smoothly, her maternal instincts turning her fear into steel. "But the book isn't the real problem, Clayton. The real problem is the deeds." She pulled out the heavy parchment documents. "You don't own the resort," Hannah said, her voice echoing in the quiet cabin. "Your family never did. According to these original surveys, Harrison Caldwell forged the property lines after the fire. The resort, the land it sits on, and the access roads. They all sit squarely on the Kevin Harding estate. You've been operating a multi-million-dollar business on stolen land." The two deputies exchanged nervous glances. One of them subtly stepped away from Caldwell. "You're a crazy homeless woman," Caldwell spat, though his voice shook. "Nobody will believe you. They won't have to," Hannah replied. "The FBI handles interstate land fraud and historical embezzlement. Mr. Finch is an estate lawyer, and he loves a good paper trail. Now, get out of my cabin." For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the crackle of the wood stove and Leo's quiet breathing. Caldwell stared at the documents in Hannah's hands, realizing his family's 80-year dynasty was entirely hollow. He turned on his heel and stormed out into the snow, his deputies trailing hastily behind him. Hannah locked the door behind them, collapsing into the armchair, her whole body shaking violently. She looked at the ledger, the bonds, the deeds. She looked at Leo, who was staring at her with wide eyes. "Mom?" he asked quietly. "Are we going back to the car tonight?" Hannah pulled him into a fierce hug, tears finally spilling hot down her cheeks. She buried her face in his hair, the smell of pine and old paper surrounding them. The generational curse of the Harding family had ended tonight. "No, baby," Hannah whispered, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're never sleeping in the car again. We're home."